Hi! If you are new here, all you need to know is that I have watched the first season of the One Piece live-action adaptation, and now, for the first time ever, I am reading the manga, and, more specifically, the first 100 chapters that the live-action has covered so far. With all of that said, let's begin! Today, I'll be covering the chapters in Volume 6, from 45 to 53. I'm actually a bit surprised about how little Sanji focus this volume had. I know it's coming and soon, but at this point the live action had already revealed a bit more information, so that's why I didn't expect Sanji to be pushed to the back for now. This volume was mostly about the attack from Krieg and also about Mihawk. However, there was some very interesting details that weren't in the live action that I want to talk about, unless, of course, I forgot something, because I've only watched the show once. This volume starts right where we left off, which is the scene between Sanji, Luffy, and the pirate that Sanji cooked for. I feel like so far, the manga has many individual panels where we just see characters silently observing something, and only later we get to find out what's that all about. I noticed that usually it's Luffy, but it happens with other characters too. In this case, we see Zeph, who clearly notices that Sanji gave food for that pirate, but doesn't say anything. Obviously, since I know their backstory from the live action, that silence makes a lot of sense. Plus, later in this same volume, we even see both Sanji and Zeph agree with giving food to the hungry pirates, even if it means they'll have to fight them later on. We also see the cooks gossiping in the kitchen and talking about Don Krieg and his armada. I find it a little bit funny how absolutely every new pirate captain we meet is called the worst in these seas, when in reality they end up being small fry in comparison to actually strong people. In this volume we meet Mihawk, who is actually strong, and Krieg, this guy who is supposed to be the scariest in East Blue, seems like a joke in comparison. And I am not saying that our crew should start underestimating their opponents, but I simply find it funny how so many pirates get called the worst in East Blue when we're still only scratching the surface with the whole power scaling situation. But going back to Sanji, the cooks in the kitchen speculate that he wants to become the head chef of Baratia someday. In the live action, Luffy had made the exact same assumption, but the difference is that there, Sanji himself corrected him immediately and told him about the All Blue, but in the manga, even by the end of this volume, Sanji still seems like a mystery. There's nothing wrong with that, but I loved that scene in the live action a lot, so I am simply a bit impatient to get to all the stuff about Sanji in the manga too. Next, a good chunk of the chapter is just Luffy comedy. It was really funny how he kept breaking plates while he was supposed to wash them, and instead of apologizing for that, he only apologized for forgetting to keep count on how many he broke. Then we also get some more comedy with the whole crew. In one of my previous reviews, I mentioned how much I loved the dinner scene in the live action and that I missed it in the manga. But now that I've read this volume, I feel like that scene was pulled from chapter 45, so I guess my hunger for group banter is sated for now. In chapter 46, we see Sanji and Zeph fight, where Zeph is trying to push Sanji away so that he can follow his real dream. Obviously, in the manga, none of that is mentioned yet, but it's natural to experience a story in a different way when you are already aware of certain future plot points. I found it very funny how Nami was playing into Sanji's infatuation with her and abusing her position to get stuff for free. In the live action, she mostly ignored Sanji, so it was fun to see a little bit different dynamic here. Plus, that fits her character so well. Also, it was Usopp who bickered with Sanji the most here, while in the live action, it was always Zoro. I think that Zoro-Sanji dynamic is still coming, but it's fun to see that Usopp is also included so much. This scene also had one detail that I found interesting. When Zoro made a remark about Nami bewitching Sanji, she replied, "You three better watch out too." In that scene it was said like a joke, but Nami actually does end up betraying the crew in this volume, so that line was probably purposeful. After that, Baratie gets threatened by Krieg's pirates. In the live action, this conflict was replaced with a fight against Arlong himself, while Krieg only appeared briefly. If I am being honest, I think the live action made a good decision, because Krieg himself isn't all that interesting. However, what I loved was the emotional conflict that he added. Sanji was all for feeding him and his pirates, even if it meant they would attack Baratie later on. When other cooks stopped him, Zeff himself came and provided food for those pirates, and later even straight up asked his cooks if any of them knew what real hunger feels like. Even if I hadn't seen the live action and didn't know the story, I feel like the message still comes across pretty clearly. Plus, specifically with Sanji, I feel like you can interpret his position in multiple ways as well. He says his job is to feed people, not judge them, and even without the additional knowledge of his backstory, this stance doesn't feel cheap at all. It's like he sees food and water as basic human rights, and whatever comes after that is a separate issue. So, at the start of this video, I mentioned how there were some interesting details that I don't remember from the live action. The first one is the fact that Zeff had actually been to the Grand Line. Not only that, but he spent a whole year there. Plus, that logbook they keep talking about seems important. In the live action, there was a part where Zeff and Garp had a conversation, and it seemed like they knew each other. I think that there is probably a whole interesting backstory with all the older characters. At the end of the season, I remember Garp dropped some hints about how similar Luffy is to him after all, and I even wondered if there's a possibility that Garp himself used to be involved with pirating. That's just a theory, but now with the added knowledge that Zeff had been in the Grand Line, that theory expanded a bit, because I feel like all of that has to be connected somehow. Zeff, Garp, the Grand Line, and probably some other older characters, like Gold Rogers himself. As always, please no spoilers. I'm just throwing some of my thoughts on the table, as vague as they are at this point. Another detail I don't recall from the live action is the mention of someone called Red Eyes, and how Johnny confused them with Hawkeye. It could be just a comedic moment and nothing more, because the cooks literally said that Red Eyes caught fire and exploded, but it could just as equally be a mention of an actual character we'll meet later on in the story. Next, we see Sanji ask why Mihawk attacked Krieg's pirates, and Zeff speculates that maybe they'd interrupted his nap. It's funny because in the live action, that joke was turned to the actual reason that Mihawk provided for destroying Krieg and his people. In the manga, he simply said that he did that for fun. I absolutely love the exchange that happens after that. We see Zoro and Luffy look excited about the idea of how dangerous the Grand Line is. I especially loved Zoro's line about how he accepted the possibility of death the day he made a promise to become the world's greatest swordsman. Luffy parroted that idea, and Sanji called them both stupid. The panel after that showed Zeff, who clearly looked angry and frustrated because Sanji talks as if he is already given up on his own dreams. Once again, I can see that because I've seen the live action and I already know what Sanji and Zeph think, but I feel like even without that, the manga keeps dropping these subtle hints so that the first-time readers would be able to deduce some things if they try. After that, we see how the pirates are about to attack the restaurant, and then their ship gets cut in half. Like I mentioned before, in the live action this happened as a separate thing, and the ones who attacked Baratia were Arlong's crew. What's not different are two things. This is the part where Nami leaves, and also the part where Zoro fights Mihawk. In the live action, that fight was adapted pretty much one-to-one, including the dialogue, which makes me really happy because there was some very cool and memorable lines in this fight. The main one was obviously Zoro saying how wounds on the back are a swordsman's greatest shame. Another great line that I'm glad made it into the live action was Mihawk saying how he doesn't hunt rabbits with a cannon. And finally, Zoro's oath to Luffy was another iconic moment. It's no surprise that the live action stuck as close to the manga as possible, because everything about this confrontation was just perfect. While I'm still on the topic of this fight, I want to talk about the swords. From the hints I gathered in both the manga and the live action, I feel like it's possible that there are some special magical objects in the world of One Piece. Mihawk really made it seem like his black blade is very special, and as for Zoro, I feel like Kuina's old sword is also somehow special. The fact that it's the only sword out of 3 that survived this fight could only be symbolic, but I think that there's also a more mechanical reason for that. Here, I would also like to add a theory I have about the live-action Season 2. When Zoro replaces the 2 swords he'd lost, I think that they will also be somehow special and not just any generic swords that anyone could get. Next, let's shift the focus to Nami. In both the manga and the live action, this is the part where she leaves, but it happens a little differently. In the live action, she was still present for Zoro's fight, and I actually loved that decision. It showed how much she cared about this crew. In the manga, that care was also shown, only in a different way. Here, when she is alone on the ship, we see her cry and just straight up say how she hopes she can reunite with the boys and how much she wants to sail with them once she's free. Seeing Nami's mask drop as soon as she was alone felt like a really emotional and significant scene, and I really loved how it was emphasized that she wants to stay with our crew. I am really excited to get to that part in the manga. Zoro's fight was adapted pretty much one-to-one, and I feel like Nami's breakdown and Luffy giving her the hat has to be another scene that was probably also adapted one-to-one, because I can't imagine it playing out in a different way. But going back to present, it stood out to me how Sanji screamed that Zoro should just abandon his stupid dream. He is clearly projecting, because at the moment that's exactly what he is doing, and I can't wait to see him change his mind. We also see the crew split up, with Usopp and Zoro following Nami while they can still see Going Merry on the horizon, while Luffy stays to help Baratia fight off Greek's pirates. There was no split up in the live action, so I'm curious how will Luffy and Sanji even find the others? Will Usopp and Zoro go back for them? Or perhaps I'm overthinking and they'll simply use one of those snail phones to share their location. I also think it's possible that we'll get another side story that didn't make it into the live action, and our crew might reunite through that side quest. This is a small detail in the grand scheme of things, but that split up still raised some questions for me. The volume ends with the beginning of the fight against Greek pirates. So far, I found the fight against Arlong a bit more interesting in the live action, but the manga also had some cool details. First, I love the concept that the Baratia ship can transform and be turned from a restaurant into a more battle-ready ship. Another small but fun detail I loved was the fact that all the cooks have giant forks and table knives instead of normal weapons. Overall, I don't think this fight will be long, but I have a theory that it will end the same way how it was in the live action, with Luffy drowning and Sanji saving him. Even if that's not how this fight ends, I think that this scene happens in the manga at some point either way, because it felt like a pretty significant moment. The final thing I want to talk about are the cover stories. There's one thing that really confused me. In this volume, we see Buggy get rescued by a mysterious lady. Normally, I'd think this is a new character, but what confuses me is that the sails of her ship have the same heart pattern as Alvida's ship did, and even more importantly, she's wearing the exact same looking hat, the one that's like a cowboy hat, only instead of being fully round, one side is cut off. There's no way that's just a coincidence, right? Because that hat looks too recognizable to be just a generic hat worn by multiple characters. But that mysterious lady looks nothing like Alvida, so unless she found and followed a great diet and exercise plan, this must be someone else. On the other hand, she shows Buggy a poster of Luffy, and from the trailer of the show's Season 2, I know that Alvida and Buggy do team up and try to have a rematch. So is this someone related to Alvida, or could it be that this is Alvida herself, only for some reason she looks like a completely different person? I think it might be just like her introduction, where she imagined herself looking completely differently than she does in reality, and this cover story page is supposed to be from her point of view. Also, in the trailer for Season 2, there is another girl who wears a white hat, but that hat looks different than the one Alvida had. It seems that the live action made all the costumes pretty accurate to the manga, so I think that the girl from the trailer was a different character than the mysterious woman who saved Buggy, and my main theory is still that this mysterious woman is someone connected to Alvida. As always, please don't spoil me. And those were my thoughts about this volume. Thank you for listening. Share your own thoughts in the comments, and if you are interested, you can subscribe and I'll see you again as I review Volume 7.